Um, all right. So today we have Dan Duffy with us, and Dan and I met. We were just discussing about 5 years ago at Gilda's Club in Madison, where he was the keynote speaker, and I ran a small group for caregivers. So Dan, let's start off with your connection to cancer, the cancer community, and let's start with your diagnosis.
So the interesting thing about the cancer community is it's not a community you ever ask to be a part of, but once you become part of it, it kind of comes, part of your fabric, part of your DNA. It all started for me. It actually started in the summer of 2001. I started having just like a lot of pain out of nowhere. And it was a bit of a red herring because it was lower back pain. And so I had a car accident back about 5 years prior where I was actually thrown out of a Jeep at 60 miles an hour and somehow walked away. So I thought this lower back pain was arthritis coming back to get me. And at first it was a nuisance, but then it got to be chronic. And there's nothing more debilitating than chronic pain. And so by the time New Year's Eve hit in 2001, like I was in desperate shape, and I had tried all sorts of stuff, from epidural steroid injections to popping like 16 Advil a day, which is not recommended at all. And then finally, I called a buddy of mine who was a chiropractor who'd actually helped me get through the car accident prior. And I'm in tears. This is like March of 2002. And I'm in tears. I'm in so much pain. I'm like, I have no idea what to do. And he said, we got to loosen that back up. So lay down in the bed and dangle your feet over the edge and, slowly bring one knee up at a time. So I brought the right knee up and didn't feel anything. And then I brought the left knee up and I felt something move in my abdomen. And then I kind of pressed on it. And it actually felt like a golf ball. And I'm going, man, that shouldn't be there. And through literally two other doctors feeling it and saying, yeah, that shouldn't be there. It ended up in an emergency CAT scan, which ended up in a full biopsy, which ended up in me being diagnosed with what my oncologist called a home run in testicular cancer, which I didn't know cancer could ever be a home run. But he said, no, we're going to fight this. And I think you're going to be good. I know exactly what you have. It's a simple seminoma, know what the treatment's going to be. And so, and that's what happened. And I have to say that when I found out, I was kind of relieved, just in the sense of, before it was the devil I didn't know that was causing all this pain, and now it was the devil I did. Mm-hmm. And so once I actually had like a foe that I could focus on, mm-hmm. then it became easier. Like, mm-hmm. and there's nothing easy about cancer, but it was almost a relief to say, oh my God, this was not just in my head, or this was not just something that I was going to have to live with the rest of my life. Right. Because I'm a Catholic and I never thought of ending it. But I have to say, I prayed for God to take away the pain by any means necessary. It was that bad.
Well, and it's interesting because, nobody wants that diagnosis, but, it sounds like your oncologist had given you a good perspective on like, this is treatable. We have a plan for you. And so you could attack it. Right. And instead of that unknown and just day in and day out of misery for you. I have your book with me, and I'm going to leave a copy in our lending library. My time is up with my internship here at the end of the month. So I'm going to make sure that there's going to be a copy here that can stay. And I have to admit, I have not been reading books the way that I used to. Like, unfortunately, like my time is just been a little too under pressure, but I zipped through your book. I couldn't put it down because the writing was so riveting, and the storytelling, and like I could picture you in your bedroom suffering from the side effects of chemo or prior to your diagnosis with the pain you were in. And the way you described the car accident that you lived through was horrifying. But I mean, you were quite young, Dan, when you got diagnosed. I'm trying to remember because it's been a couple weeks since I set this down. How old were you exactly?
I was 29 and I
Okay.
was a 29-year-old boy, which means that when you're a 29-year-old boy, you don't have a primary care physician and probably haven't seen a doctor and possibly a dentist in a couple of years. I was not married yet
Right.
at the time of my diagnosis, but I got engaged shortly thereafter. I had no kids, of course.
Mhm.
So the responsibilities are different.
Mhm.
When you're just responsible for you, like for me, I tended to clam up.
Mhm.
I didn't want to what I thought was be a burden on
Mhm.
anybody.
Mhm.
And it turns out, and hindsight is a beautiful thing. It turns out that by trying to hide what I was actually going through, I was actually making things worse for the people who loved me. In an odd twist of fate, right before I got diagnosed, I was getting ready to move to LA.
Mhm.
And my lease on my apartment was up for a couple of months prior to that. My parents just said, stick your stuff in storage. We have like tons of extra space and, just like leave whenever you want to leave. So I was actually living with my parents at the time.
Mhm.
And every day my mom would come in and she'd be like, can I get you a banana? Can I get you a glass of water? And again, being a 29-year-old boy, I'm like, no, I can get it myself. And of course I'd be like, how are you feeling? I'm fine and stuff. But she knew I was lying because there's nothing fine about going through chemo. But what I didn't really realize, and I only learned later, was that I was making it harder for them by not opening up.
Mhm.
Like it's one thing I wish like someone would have told me. They're like, look, like people are going to go to the worst place imaginable. Like when my friends found out I had cancer, every one of them thought he's going to die. When in reality, like I said, my oncologist was like, we've hit a home run. So um, uh, by actually just being a little bit honest and making yourself a little bit vulnerable, I could have made things easier. And not only that, but you're like one of the most spectacular caregivers I've ever met. And when you're actually able to be a caregiver, when you actually know that you're helping the person who's going through it, doesn't feel good.
Yeah. I mean, not to make this anything about me, but Jim made a video at the end of his life that he left for the kids and I, and he made it about a month after, or a month prior to his passing. It was right after he ended treatment. And he says in that, he's talking about our relationship. And he tells the woman who is doing the interview for this video that like she can just look at me and she knows and she can see right through me. And he's like, and it drives me crazy because I'm trying to mask how I'm feeling. And I just want to, I just want to enjoy that we're, at a dinner with friends or whatever. And he's like, and she can see right through me that I feel awful. But, I don't think it's uncommon, especially with men, not to make it a gender thing, but to put on that tough exterior because you don't also at the same time as a patient, you don't want people to know how bad it is.
Right.
Right. So, and you were trying to protect your parents and probably Stephanie
I was, yeah.
from, to keep them from knowing how badly it actually felt. But you're right. You write about it in this book.
The interesting thing, though, is that by not telling them how I felt,
Yeah. They're mine.
they went darker places
Mhm.
than how I was actually feeling.
Yeah.
And just the little things like, for instance, like when my mom came in and asked if I wanted a banana, like feeling useful, like feeling that you have purpose, is kind of an amazing thing. It's sort of why we're here.
Mhm.
And it allows people, like when you allow to let go, it allows people to feel helpful.
Right.
When in reality, like what you really want to do, like when you get diagnosed, is you want to try control the situation as much as possible because you've now just been thrown into the most uncontrollable situation
Mhm.
that you've ever faced in your life. And so what you try to do is you're like, you know what, I can take care of me, and like the stuff that I can do, I can get out of bed and, like get a glass of water. But in reality, the real power is being able to let go and to let people do for you. Because honestly, if the roles are reversed, you're the first person in there saying, what can I do? What can I get you? Can I fluff your pillows? Get you a glass of water? And so it took me a long time to actually figure that out. But once I did, I've become an absolute just disciple about it's okay to let go, and it's okay to let people help you. And in fact, you're doing them a favor if you do.
Yeah, it's a very helpless feeling to watch somebody you love, whether it's your child or spouse or significant other, go through that. I mean, it's such a helpless feeling, because you would do anything to take those rounds of chemo or take that pain and sickness away from them. But at the same time, you're right. When you're the one diagnosed, you're grasping for that control because it feels like it's been so stripped away with that diagnosis. So, you mentioned the back pain, and then you mentioned finding the mass. Were there other symptoms that you dealt with?
So now the interesting thing was this tumor was getting bigger, and it was getting bigger fast. The interesting thing was that while it was getting bigger, I was losing weight and I didn't know it. And so what would happen was I'd eat and my stomach would expand, which is what it does, which would then push on the tumor, which would then push on the side of my spine. So it actually became a little bit painful to eat. And so without even knowing it, like probably my caloric intake went probably below like 800 to 900 calories a day, just because every time I ate, it would hurt. So I'd stop. And so, so I lost a bunch of weight. I think with me, like when I go back and think about it, there was pain. It's being testicular cancer. There was pain down there, but there's a really odd thing about pain in the sense of your body tends to focus on the worst. So my back pain was actually masking the pain that I had in the testicular area because the back pain was worse.
That makes sense.
Yeah. So those were really my symptoms. And like some guys, like they'll feel, a lump. I think it's absolutely huge that you do a testicular self-exam every month. It's enormous. You can't imagine it enough. And if they're super sensitive, then something may not be right. Like you definitely want to check that out. Of course, if you feel like any lumps or anything that feels odd, absolutely check it out. And I have to say this, like to guys, especially about testicular cancer. I know people who have passed away because they've ignored it. Because like with guys, like they get really like self-conscious about that. And I get it. But your body doesn't lie to you.
Right.
And so when your body's trying to tell you something, the best thing that you can possibly do is listen. And I think the biggest thing that I would have to share about that is that you're not alone, and you're not the first person who's gone through it. Cancer is a really isolating feeling. You think nobody can possibly understand what you're going through, when in reality, there's thousands upon thousands of people, if not millions of people, who have gone through what you're going through. Like everything's already been done before. And people study a long time to get really good at being able to diagnose, being able to help. And then of course, in the case of the physical is only part of it, like the emotional is almost something that hits you worse. And there's people out there who get what you're feeling. So while everybody, and it's virtually everybody says the same thing, like I feel very, very alone and very, very isolated. Know that you're not alone. I mean, you got to keep telling yourself that until you finally believe it, and then go out and speak to someone. Because I didn't, and it was really hard. Like I fell into a lot of pitfalls that even ones that I saw coming and I could not get out of my own way, because I was a 29-year-old boy.
Right. Right.
And we're idiots. Men are idiots.
Some of you just mature a little bit slower, Dan. So
Yeah. To me, I took a while.
So what I think you've kind of summed it up really beautifully, actually, without me even asking. But are there other things aside from, you know, what you just mentioned about you're not the only one to have gone through this? Seek help, know that you're not alone, and connect with places that can offer that additional support, whether it be like an agency like ours, Home of Hope, Gilda's Club. Not every community has something like this. I know I've been really lucky to live in places that do. But I know there's also like Facebook support groups and things like that. We live in a day and age where I'm so thankful for the technology we have. But what else can you think of that might be helpful to pass on to people that are newly diagnosed? Or what do you wish you had known at the beginning?
So this is something that I don't think anybody talks about. To this day, I still think nobody talks about it until people are called out upon it. You and I have a mutual friend in Matthew Zachary, the gentleman who started Stupid Cancer. Right. And I love Matt, and he's an amazing guy, but he and I vastly digress when it comes to this one particular point. So one time he put up, can we finally stop using military terminology? Like a battle, a war, a fight. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I wholeheartedly say no to that. And the reason why I say no is because while cancer is very isolating, cancer is also very, very personal. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times it has to deal with the type of cancer you have. Like a blood cancer is one thing where you have like cancer cells going throughout your body. It's another thing to have a tumor. A tumor allows a focus point, so to speak. Mm-hmm. And so like, I remember the night before I started chemotherapy was the most pain I'd ever been in my life. It was the biggest the tumor was ever going to be. It was the night I got engaged. It was actually St. Patrick's Day of 2002. Yeah. And I remember there's a movie called Mask. And it's a true story about a kid named Rocky Dennis, mm-hmm. Who had this disease, as he quoted, that makes my face real unreal. And he would have these massive, massive headaches. And I remember a scene in that movie with Eric Stoltz and Cher, and Rocky goes to the doctor. He goes, my headaches are getting better. And he goes, oh yeah, well, what did you do? And he goes, and I talked to them. And so that popped into my head. Like as I'm writhing in agony, it popped into my head. So then I started calling my tumor every 4 and 13 letter word in the book. And I'm like, get your licks in now, because tomorrow you are so dead. Mm-hmm. And it actually helped a little bit. So I'm not saying that's going to work for everybody, but cancer is also kind of an instinctual thing. Mm-hmm. I treated it as a battle. I treated it as a war. I treated it like a fight, mm-hmm. Because to me, that's what felt the most comfortable in a very uncomfortable situation. Mm-hmm. Some people look at their cancer as a journey. Mm-hmm. And this is something, like God has put this into my life to either teach me something or to get me to go on a different path. And that wasn't who I was, but I do know some people who are like that. I think age may have a little bit to do with that. And then there's other people who I refer to them as the road. And the road basically looks at cancer like it's a bump in the road. It is nothing but a disease. It is nothing but something in the way. And it's something that you deal with, and then it's gone and it's over. Mm-hmm. And I really do tend to think that people discover that on their own. Mm-hmm. The military has flat out come out and said, we don't care if you use military terminology, because quite honestly, we don't want to fight what you have to fight. So if you're worried about offending people in the military, take that out of the equation, because like every person I know in the military, I was like, dude, you do what you have to do to survive this. So that's number one. Number two, I don't think it's fair if we don't agree with the way someone treats their disease to tell them that you're doing it wrong. It's like Henry Ford said, if you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. And basically what he was saying was it's the state of mind that you're in. So if a war makes sense to you, if a war makes you feel better, if it like kind of gets you to like, like hulk up and like, all right, I'm going to beat this, then by all means use it. And if it's something that's more philosophical and that helps you, by all means use that as well. And if it's something that's just like, get out of my way, again, be that way. Right. What I would say, and I would say this to nurses and social workers and psychologists and psychiatrists, is that I think it's possibly something that you should start having a conversation with early in the diagnosis with a patient, to say, look, you're going to feel a lot of ways, but there's three kind of potential ways on how you're going to deal with this, and whatever you deal with, like however you deal with it, it's okay. So I mean, I feel very, very strongly about this, and so that's why I'm thrilled with the opportunity that you have given me to be able to say this.
Oh, well, I'm just so pleased that you and I could reconnect after all these years, and that you'd join me for something like this, because like I said, I read your book, and having only met you one time, but having stayed in touch over all these years and reading other things you've written, it was high time that I read this, and I could just hear your voice and picture everything. And I love that your love story with Stephanie like falls in line with your diagnosis. And
oh my gosh,
just how those two intersected. And I've never met your wife, but I would love to after reading this. So, and your mom and dad, I can just picture them and your trip to Ireland and things like that. So
they all helped save my life, like every one of them. And the people that I have met through this journey, there I go talking about a journey. See, it wasn't a journey when I was going through it, but now to me, it's kind of more of a journey because it's evolved. The people that I've had the good fortune to meet, you included especially, I remember the talk you gave that day. It was unbelievably powerful. And I've never forgotten it. And I've never forgotten your bravery and in you talking about it, and how vociferous you got in being an advocate, and just how important that is. A lot of times when you're the patient, it's Jim was so blessed. I was so blessed. We had strong advocates. You don't always have an advocate, and that's really hard. And sometimes you have to advocate for yourself. And a lot of times, that makes things so much harder than it's already going to be. Yeah. So what I would tell then to people like friends and family members, like if you see a lack of an advocate, don't be afraid to kind of step in and say, look, I want to be here for this. A lot of times, and I can't necessarily blame folks for this, but a lot of times people will leave. Your friend group, even family members, don't know how to deal with it, and they walk away. I look at those folks kind of like, you're doing me a favor, in the sense of when you're down in the dumps and you're in your worst place possible, that's when you really
start recording again. All right.
Okay.
So you were talking about friends and how they, sometimes during a diagnosis they'll leave, but you only have so much energy at that time when you're battling cancer to begin with. So
yep. It's
like for you,
it's it's kind of a finite thing, time. It's the only thing that's really our enemy, in regards to like how we live our lives. Like there's never enough time, and in reality, it's like with me, it's that I waste too much time as opposed to like making as much of the time that I have. I had a few friends leave, and what was really interesting was one of them left and then came back, but came back in the middle of it. And to be honest with you, I didn't know they left, because it's sort of odd. Like when you're going through it, you're not really paying attention necessarily to what your friends are doing. And so one of them called me. I was actually in a McDonald's eating breakfast by myself, which is something that I like to do. I liked being alone a lot when I was going through this. And my phone rings and I realized I hadn't talked to this guy in a while. I'm like, hey, how you doing? He goes, great. He goes, listen, I apologize. I've been MIA because I really just quite didn't know how to handle this.
Mhm.
And it finally got the better of me to just reach out and to see how you're doing.
Mhm.
And it meant the world. It really did. Like it meant the absolute world to me that he actually took the time to do that. So maybe that's a way of saying it's not too late. Um, but yeah, it's cancer makes people do crazy things, both the person who's going through it and, the people around them.
Yeah.
And not everybody wants to deal with it. Not everybody has the makeup to deal with it necessarily. And even like when people get cured, I have a lot of friends who have actually been through testicular cancer, and you'd never know it because they never ever talk about it.
Right.
And I theirs is not my life to live, and I can't make them do anything. But it's interesting. You're given a really interesting skill set when you have been given a cancer diagnosis and you go through a bunch of things. And it had to have meaning for me. So I had to say that, I had to say to myself that if I'm going to do anything with this, I use the term get naked, and I was going to have to just be real and raw so that you have no, qualms about where I'm coming from, so to speak.
Mhm.
But I really did, like, I wanted to jump kind of back into the fire to maybe help some people avoid a lot of the things that I ran into that I probably could have avoided had I known they were coming.
Yeah, so tell me about that, because you and I are kind of on the same wavelength with that. I mean, when my husband died, I had the option. Nobody forced me to continue to advocate for colon cancer awareness in specific, or try to connect with other widows, whether they be colon cancer or other cancer, any type of widow, really, for that matter. I've even been told, like, we're so glad you decided to stay in the community, so to speak. What, so, you went through treatment. You're, okay, so how many years out are you now?
Oh my gosh, I'm out a long time. I'm 19 out now.
Okay, so clean bill of health on the testicular cancer.
Yep.
We should mention that you were able to have children. You and Stephanie were able to conceive your children. And you mentioned that in the book, and that was a miracle, essentially.
I credit my oncologist.
Yeah.
I really do. My oncologist had prescribed a cocktail of 3 drugs: cisplatin, VP16, and bleomycin. Cisplatin is actually the drug that Dr. Larry Einhorn came up with.
Mhm.
He's the guy who treated Lance Armstrong, so that's like it would be a claim to fame. But
Sure.
in reality, that guy changed innumerable cancer diagnoses. I mean, I'll put it to you this way: they did there's like Class A and Class B studies from the medical boards before it actually gets approved, and his work was so good and just so stunningly effective that they didn't use phase 2 trials. Like,
Wow.
phase 1 was it, and then I mean, he changed the game. Like,
Yeah.
Larry Einhorn changed the game. And so so what happened was, so when you get diagnosed and you go through all that treatment, and I was going to be 3 different drugs, my oncologist said, any questions? And my dad, who never says boo to a doctor, said, doctor, my father, he had died of esophageal cancer. And so my dad had been giving to Memorial Sloan Kettering every year, like in his honor. And it just so happened that 2 or 3 months prior, they had sent him a hand-signed letter saying, if you ever have to deal with cancer, then please reach out to us. Thank you so much for your support throughout the years. And my dad said, is there any way you would maybe call Sloan Kettering to see if this is the best course of action for my son? It's maybe the first and last time my dad was ever an advocate for my medical, because my mom was in just as goofy a place as my head was as well. And my doctor said, yeah, I did my residency at Sloan Kettering. I'll be happy to call him. He called him that afternoon, and not a month prior, they had finished a study that hadn't even been produced in the journals yet, that said that for my specific type of cancer, bleomycin, which is nicknamed the carpet bomber because it kills everything, was deemed medically unnecessary. So instead of having 3, I only had to have 2. And for testicular cancer, they give you a lot of chemotherapy. It's 4 hours a day for 5 straight days, and then you take 2 weeks off, and then you repeat that 3 more times. So there was so much chemo. But without the if I had bleomycin, I don't have kids the natural way. I'm convinced of it in my heart of hearts. But because he actually listened to my dad and then called that day, I mean, what doctor does that? Especially a doctor in like the early 2000s. No doctors do that.
Right.
The humility that he showed was unimaginable. Hopefully not by today's standards, but back then, nobody did that.
Right.
So,
I love it when doctors are able to set their egos aside and reach out for that second opinion, or communicate for second opinions for the patient. Side note, my dad walked out of our first oncology appointment, and he was a retired doctor from the UW-Madison. He paged the oncologist that had done a fellowship under him and said, my son-in-law has just been diagnosed with stage 4 colon cancer. Can you see him? And the doctor had us in a week and a half. So,
wow.
And that doctor had thankfully trained the one we were seeing. And so he was like, yep, she's doing everything I would do. So, but I loved that, because I was a huge 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th opinion nationwide on my husband, that our oncologist was willing to talk and send records to all the people I contacted. So
it's huge. It's huge, because honestly, it's like when we look at the medical team, the patient is on the medical team along with the doctors and nurses and caregiving staff. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, and you know, like, I mean, your boys have changed your life. I mean, I see what you write about them. I see how you write about them, and like the throwback pictures, and like what a proud dad you are. And so to think that might have not happened had that drug actually been given to you. I mean, I think it's important to recognize that you did use the fertility bank, just in the event that it wasn't going to happen naturally. But
absolutely.
I think it goes without saying, sometimes you're in a position when you're first diagnosed that there isn't time to take that added step to preserve your fertility, whether you're male or female. And because it's such a rush to get into treatment for the sake of your life. So thinking about future lives might not be on your radar, or there might not be time to do that. So I think it's important that you and Stephanie did that. But also so thankful that your treatment regimen didn't result in you being sterile. So
absolutely. It's interesting that you bring this up. So when we were at CancerCon, which is the largest conglomeration of young adult cancer patients and survivors and caregivers in the country, and pre-COVID, they used to meet every April, and hopefully will be again once we're in a post-COVID world, please God. But we did this thing called the 5-minute blog, And we would have patients and caregivers sit down with us and just answer 5 questions like in rapid succession. And one of the questions that we asked was, what do you wish you had known prior? And we had a shocking amount of women say, I wish I was given the opportunity, not even just wish they'd been given the opportunity, they wish they'd been told that there were the possibility of saving their eggs. I mean, it's and the stories that you hear about how they're just rushed in and they get diagnosed, and then 2 days later, like they're having their ovaries removed, or I mean, it's pretty staggering, actually. And it's heartbreaking. And you can tell, like, these folks, like, as if they had enough to deal with, they now have to live with this for the rest of their lives.
Right.
And that's not a pain that ever goes away.
Oh, I'm sure it's not. I mean, you and I both as parents, we can't quite imagine what that would have felt like, but it just adds another layer of that grieving process, I believe, because I at times, in my opinion, and people can argue this with me, but a diagnosis can lead into the grieving process, denial, bargaining, all of those things.
Absolutely.
Acceptance. I feel like I went through that process just as a caregiver, watching my husband go through that, and then re-experienced it. But when you're rushed into treatment because it's the only way to save your life, and there's really no time to wait, and you have to give, maybe even, like you mentioned, unknowingly give up the chance to reproduce, whether you're male or female, then you have to grieve that loss along with the other losses you've experienced due to cancer. Like you mentioned, possible friendships, things like that, whether they be friends that were healthy and just happen to not be able to deal with your diagnosis. I know we experienced the same thing, actually, Dan. So it's something people don't talk about, but, and I don't know that I've encountered it very often in the cancer community, so to speak, but we had the same thing happen to us, and it's very painful. But like you said, your energy has to be redirected in so many different places when you're in the midst of it. So, and
Absolutely.
I've been thankful to have those people. One of them came to town. They had moved. He came and sat with Jim just a week before he died, and had that closure on that. So, and then after his passing, I reconnected with the other person because I couldn't carry that around without having closure. So, and actually we reconnected and are friends again. So, so now you're this many years past treatment and diagnosis, and you've remained connected. Like you mentioned, you go to Cancer Con, you've spoken at the Madison Gilda's Club and possibly in other places too, I'm sure. You've developed, so your book is the half book, which I love. He's taking his ball and he's going home. But what's the half fund? Like, how have you taken your experience with cancer and how it impacted your life, and it remains a part of who you are, right? Like,
correct.
What is it?
It's so the half fund, it's not quite as quick as we'd like it to be right now, but there's kind of a different reason, and it's a glorious reason. So the half fund basically was meant to tell stories about people's cancer, to help share them, and to help people, and to encourage them to tell their own. And the first project that we made was actually the book, the half book. What was really cool is the way the half fund is set up is that any project that would get money from us, the people have to split all of their profits in half to any cancer charity of their choice, and then half comes back to us where we give it away again. Now, what's really cool was that the American Cancer Society, I'm a huge fan of them. Like, on the surface, they're huge and big and they're kind of faceless, but where the American Cancer Society really works is in the communities where they are. Steps to Hope, Real Men Wear Pink, Hope Lodge. I don't know if you've ever heard of Hope Lodge. It's one of the most amazing things in the world. So just say, usually you'll find Hope Lodges in major cities, and just say you live kind of in the rural community and access to the best treatment is over 50 miles away. Hope Lodge is a place where you and a caregiver, you as the patient and a caregiver, if you're over 50 miles from where you're getting your treatment, can stay free.
Awesome.
Like, oh, it's spectacular. So I'm a big fan of the ACS. And in fact, when I was first diagnosed, that was really the only game in town. Like, this was even before Livestrong. So when I wanted information, I went to their website and found out the information. Some of the information I wanted to find out, some of the information that I found out was like I looked up, what chemotherapy drugs am I taking, which I do not recommend to anyone. They're like, God help you if you have to take cisplatin. It's the #1 nausea causer. And I'm like, great. So we really wanted to help the American Cancer Society. And so all the proceeds of our book, like half of them have gone to the ACS. And we've been able to give them a check for $5,000, which I was thrilled with. And they were so impressed with like what we were doing in the cancer community that for the last 3 years, I've actually been serving on their leadership board here in St. Louis, and have been asked to stay another 3 years as well.
Good for you.
So that's where my focus lately has been going for the past few years. But the thing that I love, like, we've made the first, and we will absolutely make more projects with other artists, from writers to filmmakers to documentarians. I don't worry about that at all. But what I'm really, really proud of is how the book has resonated with people, and in ways that I didn't even see coming. So I write a story in the book about how I realized that my hair was actually falling out. And again, it's just like you talk about, in the sense of like when you make the like anger and bargaining and everything else. It's a process when you lose your hair. It's kind of like terrifying in a way, because as I'm getting my first chemo, the nurse says, now you'll have your hair for about a week and then it'll come out. And then so I started on a Monday, and then the next Monday I woke up and like I still had all my hair. I'm like, oh, this is great. And then I woke up Tuesday morning and it looked like I'd slept next to a gorilla. I mean, there's hair all over the bed. And I'm going, oh God, no. And so then I took a shower, and and it's just falling out. So at that point, what you say is, I'm not going to let chemotherapy take my hair. I'm going to take my hair. So again, it's like pulling for that control. And so I'll never forget, I went downstairs and my mom comes down. She goes, hey, how you doing? I'm like, I'm going to get my head shaved. She goes, wow, you got a full head of hair. And I went like that. And I pulled out a tuft of it. And she's like, oh, which is probably not a smart thing to do. But I said, like, there's a bunch of hair in the tub. I'm going to go grab it and then I'll be on my way. She goes, no, you know what? I'll take care of that. You just go do what you need to do. Well, what I didn't know was she then ran upstairs and literally took every strand of hair that she could get her hands on, and she put them in an envelope, because at this point, this is early in treatment, she didn't know if I was going to live or die. And she wanted anything to hold on to, like anything physical to hold on to. Now, a friend of mine reading the book, she had a baby die of SIDS. And she was just in shock, and like they said, would you like a lock of the baby's hair? And she goes, I guess. Like, how do you mentally prepare for something like this? Right. So she had like some of the hair from her baby, and she reads this in the book about my mom going to get the hair, and my friend lost it. She just erupted absolutely erupted. And then she called me like a day later. She goes, I just want to thank you. I'm like, for what? And she goes, this was a catalyst to finally let me begin the grieving, which allows me to begin the healing process.
Mm-hmm.
And I never saw that coming at all. So I think just by being honest, and just by sharing everything, I mean, and you can say this as well about the book because you've read it. The book's pretty irreverent. Like I'm trying to make you laugh the entire time through the misery. There's so much funny stuff that goes along with it. And like, this is not a morbid book. It's not maudlin. It's not something to depress you in any way, shape, or form. It's something to make you laugh. It's something to make you think. And it's ammunition for the next time a friend or a family member comes up to you and says, I have cancer, where you won't be saying the words, I'm sorry. You'll be saying the words, what kind? And I'm really, really passionate about that. I don't want people to be afraid of cancer, or rather to be afraid to talk about cancer. I want people to engage. Like, some of the best conversations I had during my treatment were from a friend of mine who literally just had questions. He's like, what does this mean? What does that mean? And I have to tell you, it was so refreshing to actually have, someone not say, how are you feeling? And you're like, fine. And then they follow up with, but no, how are you feeling? I guarantee you people have done that to you because I see you laughing.
I guess.
So,
yeah, I think the widows get that treatment too. So
yeah. And so, but no, it was so refreshing and it was great. And yeah, I won't even go into the questions. Yeah, I do go into the questions like in the book, and they're not interview friendly. But they were deadly serious.
Right.
And they were so serious and so off the wall that I actually had to stop and think, and I have no idea. And and I still don't know to this day a couple of the questions, a couple of the answers to the questions.
And one of your friends, and maybe it's the one you're discussing, it seems like a really colorful character. And
I have several.
So I think one of the things, what you're saying to me, it sounds like, at least, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that you were still Dan to them.
Yes.
And so whatever kind of conversations, although the topic of cancer was obviously, somewhat central to these questions, he could still talk to you the way he talked to you a month before you were diagnosed, like, well, I'm going to just shoot him straight and ask these honest questions because I've got questions and he's going to answer them. And that's our relationship, so you were still Dan. You weren't Dan, the cancer patient. Let's treat him differently now. Does that make sense?
And that was, yes. And you're so right. And it was so big. It was so important to actually have that. It was basically like, dude, I have cancer. He was like, sucks to be you. I mean, like, there's something so refreshing about that.
Yeah.
It's kind of amazing.
Yeah. No, I mean, you don't, I guess one of the things I've learned over the years is you can let it define you, or you can just, it's a part of who you are, but it doesn't encompass everything. And therefore, trying to keep those relationships as normal as possible. Well, cancer might be a topic you discuss, okay, but that like sense of constant pity and things like that can be hard to
No one wants to be pitied. No one wants to be pitied.
No, exactly. So, was there anything else you want to add, Dan? You've been so great. I'm so glad you did this with me.
I did a video, because I'm a video producer by trade. And I did a video for talk about like really, really hardcore. I did a video for families who have a baby die in the neonatal intensive care unit. And the crazy thing was, during the edit, my female editor was pregnant and my wife was pregnant at the same time. So, I mean, it was the most unfun project I ever worked on, but it was also the one that kind of taught me the most about people and how to deal with grief. Like it taught me a lot about just it was kind of amazing, the life lessons that it gave me. And one of the biggest life lessons that it did give me was the fact that when you're going through tragedy and when you're going through heartbreak and trauma, you have to keep talking. You have to keep talking to each other. For all of the couples who had a baby die in the NICU, the parents who talked with each other, like, and just like got it out and told each other what they were feeling and were brutally honest with each other and still loving at the same time, they're the ones who survive and go on and never forget, but they live their lives in honor of their baby. The parents who didn't know what to say, so they didn't say anything, they didn't make it. The couples didn't make it, none of them.
Right.
And it made me so sad. And that's really one of the things where whenever I am going through something hard in my life, first person I reach out to is Stephanie. I'm like, look, this is going on, and you know, I'm scared or I'm worried, and I just need to tell you so that if I seem off, that's why. It has nothing to do with you. And she's the same, and it's actually brought us closer, and it's been really freeing, and it's been one of the most healthy things for us for our relationship that we've ever done. And it's the same that goes with friends as well. So a lot of times you think that, you know, maybe the person doesn't want to talk about it. If the friend that I had that just asked me anything, if I didn't want to talk about something, like, dude, I don't really feel like talking about it, is that okay? They'd be like, yeah, absolutely, we'll talk about something else. Because a lot of times you don't just want to be the center of attention. You want to talk to your friends about, oh my God, you're having these issues and blah, 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 you know, like, because everybody has issues. So I think what I really want to leave you with is, don't ever stop talking to the people who are important to you, and don't ever stop sharing, and don't ever stop opening up, and don't ever stop being receptive to what you hear.
Thank you so much for meeting with me like this, for sharing this with us. You know, I think this is going to be really beneficial for the number of things you've covered with, you know, how to help caregivers feel like caregivers, like they're getting out of that helpless feeling a little bit when you're the patient. How patients can kind of change that dynamic a little bit, along with what you just shared about, you know, continuing to keep those conversations going and engaging with your loved ones, because that really is going to end up strengthening your relationships and making the situation as healthy as possible in a time of, you know, trauma or grief or whatever the struggle might be. But like I said, I'm going to have this book down in our lending library, so anybody in the area of Home of Hope can come and borrow it anytime they'd like. Such a great time just getting to see you kind of in person somewhat, as COVID friendly and like hundreds of miles away as we can do it. So
I know, anything you ever need, name it. Happy to help, and thank you so much for running back into the fire. From a survivor, it means the world. It really does.
Well, that's kind of been my motto. I didn't actually, you said it perfectly. That's been my motto recently, because I've had a few people reach out to me, and I said, you know, I didn't walk through those flames to not bring water back for those still in it, whether they're a patient or caregiver. I didn't go through that experience to not try to turn around and go back for the rest.
Because sadly, it's getting better, but it's not going anywhere anytime soon.
No, I mean, I don't want to speak for you. I'm forever profoundly changed from my experience. I will never be the Catherine I was March 17th, 2013. You know, you'll never be the Dan Duffy you were back before that diagnosis, but we can find ways to help give back to those still in it or going through it. And, you know, it's just been a pleasure. I'm so glad you did this with me, Dan. Thank you.
Oh, anytime. Thank you.
Yes, my best to your family and to your beautiful boy.
Oh, your family as well.
I just love all the red-haired boys.
I know, right?
You're
doing what we can.
A little less red here.
Oh God, yeah, it's very, very white, you know, like right along there, and so yeah, nothing I can do about it. You know what, red hair, it tends to just go away.
Yeah,
just fades.
slowly fades.
Mhm.
Well, thank you again. You guys stay safe and take care. And if there's anything I can ever do for you, let me know. Okay.
Back at you. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan.